Nearly 2 years on from the Brexit referendum, the European Commission has published a draft withdrawal agreement. How will it impact on the negotiations between the UK and the EU? Not long ago, British Prime Minister Theresa May made her first official visit to China, and the two sides signed deals worth more than £9 billion. How will the UK expand its economic links with China in the post-Brexit future? When free trade is challenged by anti-globalization rhetoric and protectionism, how should the major economic powers protect trade rules? With booming infrastructure projects backed by the Belt and Road Initiative, will Europe and Asia become more interconnected? And what are the implications for the rest of the world?
It's been 2 years since the UK voted in favour of the Brexit referendum. Although some progress has been made, time is running out for all the negotiations that needs to be concluded between the UK and the EU. Will there be a hard Brexit, or will there be a softer approach to win out? And how can the UK come away from Brussels with a better deal? Last month, Prime Minister Theresa May paid a visit to China and called for a golden era 2.0 for the two countries. So why has the Prime Minister not endorsed China's Belt and Road Initiative, and what are the challenges and opportunities for further cooperation ahead? Today, I'm very happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Lord Peter Mandelson, the former British Cabinet Minister and European Commissioner of Trade, now Chairman of the Global Council, and by Charles Liu, founder of How Capital. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Welcome to Dialogue, gentlemen. What do you think of the outcome of the official visit, the first of its kind, paid by Prime Minister Theresa May to the PRC after she took office?
Well, I'm very glad she made the visit. When she first became Prime Minister, she seemed to have a strange indifference towards China, and we weren't sure whether she was going to continue the policy that had been put in place by her predecessor David Cameron. But she's decided that continuity is best. I welcome that, because I think a strong relationship between China and the UK is very important for both countries.
What do you think of the golden era?
I think the golden era 2.0, to differentiate from golden era, has negative connotations, because golden era, as David Cameron had projected, was something that was more overwhelmingly positive and strategic, whereas golden era 2.0, I think, is less so, less strategic, and probably to differentiate herself from what was in golden era 1.0.
Prime Minister May gave a pause to not only the Hinkley Point, but also the Belt and Road Initiative, and that had caused a lot of speculation from the media reports. What do you think of the issue of reconsidering both the Hinkley Point as well as the ambitious blueprint of President Xi Jinping to project the Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, as far as Hinkley is concerned, that received the go-ahead. It was confirmed, it was signed. It's a massive investment by the China nuclear energy industry in this major development in Britain, and it has the green light, and nobody's going to reconsider it. Belt and Road is completely different. I mean, the Belt and Road Initiative is a major program conceived and undertaken by China to ensure that the infrastructure and the lanes and carriageways that need to carry commodities and raw materials to China and goods back and forth between China and the rest of the world have the infrastructure in place to enable that free flow of goods and materials to take place. It's a huge undertaking. And in my view, the rest of the world doesn't need to make a value judgment about it. It's going to happen anyway, whatever we say. There are, however, going to be major opportunities to invest in it, finance it, for opportunities for collaboration, for investment partnerships in order to roll it out. And I believe that countries like my own and others in Europe should be participating in it.
Small or big, size does matter for the bilateral relationship. For example, governments on both sides of the transatlantic ocean start to reassess the global implications of the Belt and Road Initiative, meaning they want to figure out whether this blueprint by President Xi Jinping carries any geopolitical competition.
Yes, they do.
National security is often cited by politicians from Europe and North America to reassess the impact of China's rise. Therefore, it is within this broad context that Prime Minister Theresa May gave a second thought to both Hinkley Point and the Belt and Road Initiative.
Look, there are some in the West who think that what Belt and Road is about is sort of strengthening China's stranglehold on the economies of all the countries that it wants to draw into this initiative. And that we're not just talking about building road or rail links or ports or other infrastructure. What China wants over time is to draw all the countries with whom it has this relationship into a sort of parallel global trading system to compete with what exists at the moment. And so, in a sense, it's not so much national security, it's about the big power projection by China in all the countries in the surrounding region and beyond, using its economic and investment muscle in order to draw those countries into an economic alignment with China, and in time a political one as well. So it's not a sort of conventional security issue. It's, to many people in the West, a new form of sort of economic, like an economic power grab, which the rest of the world will not be able to withstand. Now that's their view, but there are others in the West who take a contrary view, that they take a rather more benign, rather more positive view of it, and want to participate in it in order to realize commercial opportunities within it.
Prime Minister David Cameron was the first to join the AIIB. That's indeed a very positive gesture. That was quickly followed by other major economies of Europe. Do you think this is right, Charles? Do you think this is a contradictory signal?
Well, actually, when you have change in administration in most Western countries, you can have contradictory signals, and we've gotten a lot of contradictory signals out of Washington of late. But going back to One Belt, One Road, what's significant is there is this assumption that China is seeking to grab power. I've been involved in some Belt and Road projects, including in Pakistan. I think the benefits such infrastructure builds for the local people is immeasurable. China's rise, incredible in human history in the last 40 years, to go from $1 above India in GDP per capita to 500% that of GDP per capita in India, and to take 700 million people out of poverty. The first 20 years was really spent building infrastructure. There's a Chinese expression, you want to gain wealth, you have to build a road first. So what has happened is there is this fear from many Western parties that China is out for a power grab through economic means. But what I see is the building of infrastructure in these countries, the building of power plants. In India, in Pakistan, for example, 1/3 of the new power plants built by China are solar power, is clean power. And all these things are actually quite beneficial for the local population. And you cannot keep the local population down anymore.
Charles, I also attended a Euro-Asian Media Summit in Almaty, Kazakhstan, where Dr. Brzezinski said he had been impressed deeply by the boom of infrastructure building in China. He said it's one of the things that deserve the credit for China's rapid economic expansion. Having said this, it is also Dr. Brzezinski who put forward the idea that any country that dominates the Euro-Asian continent will dominate the world. What do you think of the geopolitical dimension?
I think that's quite likely to be the case. And I think therein lies the fear of some people in the West, that what we are seeing emerging over time from the Belt and Road Initiative is, as I say, a sort of parallel global system. Now, what many people in the West who are sensible and look at this, approach this in a more pragmatic way will say is, look, there is a global economy, there's a global system, there's an international rules-based trading system that had all its rules set for it, essentially, by the West after the Second World War. Over the last, 50, 60 years, the West, and America chiefly, has called the shots. Why should China simply embrace a system, a set of rules that have been made in the West's interests to reflect Western priorities, when China itself is re-emerging, reinstating itself as a major global economic player? Why shouldn't China have its say in remodeling and reshaping those rules and that system? And my answer to that is yes. That is exactly what China should be doing, but it should be doing it in partnership with the West, with other countries in the international system, so that collectively we can agree how these things need to be reshaped, what new rules need to be written that reflect the prerogatives and priorities of countries like China and other emerging economies, and not just those in the West. And that, to me, is the challenge of this century.
Mr. Manderson, this partnership that you put forward has actually been called into question by President Donald Trump, who puts America first, and therefore this partnership might well be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Look at Steve Bannon, who takes China as a public enemy #1, as we see release of so many national security papers by the State Department, the Pentagon, the White House, taking China as a strategic competitor. So in this broad context, Charles, are you optimistic that we are going to have a partnership?
I think we've reached a point where I'm in you and you're in me. 60% of the agricultural produce produced in the U.S. are exported to China. If you start a trade war, okay, what we've seen right now is a lot of noise, but not much real action. I think this is Western
China
politics.
has taken action. For example, State Councilor Yang Jiechi and member of the Politburo Liu He, who's in charge of economic planning, both visited Washington.
They're visiting
ahead
right
of the
now.
two plenary sessions of both NPC and the CPPCC, the political season of China each year without exception. What do you make of this?
No, there's no question.
This action.
There's no question. China doesn't want a trade war. China thinks all the talk of a trade war, of coming down hard on China, is going to be damaging for the global economy, not only to both countries. So China would like to know what the real view is. But if you really look at the discussions now, for example, on steel imports into the U.S., 24% duties, what does that mean? Who gets hit first and who gets hit the hardest? It's not China, it's Canada, it's Germany, it's Japan, it's Korea. It is a violation of WTO rules. What will happen?
There are genuine issues and real disputes which have got to be managed in trade, but those are best managed within the system of rules and dispute settlement that we have in the WTO. The concern of many of us is that the United States under this president is not really committed to the WTO. He's not really prepared to invest in and underpin the dispute settlement machinery of the WTO. That the rules are somehow set, in Mr. Trump's view, for other people and other countries, and therefore why should America have anything to do with them? Now, this is very dangerous talk, but also bear in mind, these are not views that are shared generally across the political establishment of the United States. There are as many people in America who are concerned about the direction, this trajectory that Mr. Trump seems to be following, as there are in the rest of the world.
Yes, indeed, he rejects elites and establishment of the United States. You are watching Dialogue with Lord Peter Mandelson and Charles Liu were discussing China-UK relationship under the leadership of Prime Minister Theresa May and, of course, President Xi Jinping. When we come back, we'll take a look at the impact of Brexit. Stay with us, please. Welcome back, gentlemen. One major uphill battle China is facing, I'm afraid, is the denial by both the United States and the European Union that China should be granted the full-fledged market economic status. Under this investigation or suspicions, they have launched anti-subsidy and anti-dumping investigations. So the Belt and Road Initiative is said to be a conspiracy to export China's overcapacity. The special deal that the European Union rejects is one of the items that is said to have been coming out of China as part of the overcapacity. What do you think?
I think the best way to make the Belt and Road Initiative accepted and more positively embraced outside China is for other countries and their businesses and their working people to have the chance to benefit from this huge scale of investment. And I think that we can do that. I say in my own country, you know, don't sit in judgment about the Belt and Road Initiative. It's not really our job to judge it as a sort of piece of morality. See it as a commercial opportunity. You know, Britain has huge know-how in bringing about major civil engineering projects. We have a major financial services sector that can help finance this infrastructure. You know, we have massive know-how in, for example, clean technologies. I mean, we have there's so much potential and so much scope for Britain to contribute to invest in and to benefit from Belt and Road. Let's focus on the opportunities that are at hand rather than standing back and making some moral or political judgment about it. Not least because whatever judgment we make about it is not really going to change its course. So it's going to happen, and in my view, we need to engage with it and realize commercial opportunities from it. And believe me, there are many in Europe who are already doing so.
Regarding the Golden Era 2.0, particularly the readiness and anxiety of the British government to reach out to China following Brexit, do you think Prime Minister May doesn't have a chance? She got to get to China to find opportunities.
Well, there are so many possible areas, as Lord Mandelson had said, of synergies, and in terms of what the UK has offered. I would even add one more. The British system of administration, in terms of lawyers and accountants and contract making and so on.
We're good at making things happen. We're good managers.
Exactly. And you could actually be a wonderful source of helping continental Europe in its relations with China, commercial and trade relations with China. There's so much that the UK can do. But my impression of Prime Minister May is that she's actually quite negative on China. She's not looking at the mutual benefits that can be accrued by closer collaboration. She's not looking at, for example, what you described in terms of people benefiting. Not only European can benefit from participating in the Belt and Road construction side, finance side, management side, but also shipping of goods from Europe to China.
But Charles, Prime Minister May had never been to China before she became Prime Minister. And I think that when she came into office, she was frankly badly advised by some people close to her about China, and decided suddenly to make a big issue about the nuclear energy investment, the plant at Hinkley, literally the day before the signing ceremony was going to take place locally. The Prime Minister has come a long way since those days. I think she has realized the absolute centrality of China and its economic presence internationally, the huge opportunities that are offered by China's growth, and that what we should be seeking is a reciprocal trade and investment relationship. But here is the point, I think, also. People in Britain, but elsewhere in Europe and in the United States, feel that just as we have opened up our economies to Chinese goods and exports, China should reciprocate and do likewise for Western goods and services. And I know that some in China say, well, you know, you're not competitive, or you don't produce enough, or you haven't got enough to offer. Well, that's not true of Europe as a whole by any means, as you can see in Germany and France and Italy and Spain. But in other areas, we don't just have very sophisticated manufactured goods and very advanced technology. We have very, very high quality services as well, as Charles has been describing. So there has to be a better balance. There has to be a more level playing field in areas of trade and investment. Otherwise, you're going to create political problems. You're going to provoke a backlash,
no, we are not
which will create problems for us down the road.
No, consensus has been a big issue for the European regional integration following the sovereign debt crisis. Now, when we look at the impact of her visit, if any, it took place against the backdrop of Brexit. Now, there are debates as to whether this process of Brexit should be reversed. I'd like to have your thoughts. Are we going to have a hard landing or a soft approach?
In my view, the outcome of Brexit is going to be hard for Britain in any circumstances. It's just a question of softening the blow. And the disagreement I have with my own government is that they are not doing enough to soften the economic and trade blow that is surely going to come upon us as a result not just of leaving the European Union, but leaving all the economic structures of Europe as well, taking ourselves out of Europe's giant single market, where at the moment we have 100% rights to land any good, any service in that market, and they're enforceable rights. Nobody can stop us trading in that market. The government has also decided that Britain should leave the customs union, which means that for manufactured goods in Britain, we will pay tariffs. And it's not just a question of finished goods. You know, sophisticated supply chains now consist of goods, components, bits of finished products, very sophisticated elements which are drawn together and assembled in giant, sophisticated supply chains that crisscross back and forth the border between Britain and Europe's single market every day, sometimes 3 or 4 times in the process of a single process of manufacture and assembly. Now, if we are going to put tariffs and costs and customs barriers on all that trade, then we are going to pay a huge economic price.
Given the huge costs and the impact of the hard paddling, Lord Manderson, is it possible to reverse the process of Brexit by hosting yet another referendum? Look,
what we've done so far, and it was quite a narrow vote, by the way.
Right.
I mean, it was 48% of those voting. Many people didn't even vote. So the proportion of the population who voted for Brexit was only 37% of the public as a whole. Now, you would have thought that in those circumstances the government would look for some middle way, some consensus that would reconcile both sides of this argument. So far, they've not done so. They've agreed that the referendum determined that we should leave the European Union, but we've not yet decided on what our destination should be, or indeed what price as a country we're prepared to pay for what negotiating outcome with the European Union that we're presently seeking. And it's not just a question of disagreement between government party, the Conservatives, and the opposition Labour. There's a huge disagreement going on inside the government, inside the cabinet itself, between those who I call soft leavers, who want to, yes, leave the European Union, but remain as close to Europe and its single market, to limit the economic damage, to limit the consequences for our trade, on the one hand, and those on the other who just sort of want a clean break, who just want to leave Europe, the single market, the customs union. They don't want to have anything more to do with it. Now, this is economic lunacy for Britain. So don't think this argument has ended. This argument is going to go on and on for weeks and months, and I believe won't even be fully resolved by the time we leave the European Union in March next year, if that indeed is the outcome.
We are indeed acutely aware of the bleeding wounds of the Brexit. Now, this year we're going to commemorate the 40th anniversary of China's opening up. This is a very special year. In the context of the China-EU relationship, what are your suggestions for the future of the most important trade relation, or one of the most important bilateral economic relationship between European Union or between UK and China?
I think the most important part going forward, at least for the next year or two, is to defend globalization. Defend the system that has brought about 2 billion people out of poverty. The system that over the course of the last half a century increased literacy from 10% of the global population to 85% of the global population. Increase the material survival rate, also in terms of age of people living now averaging to 70, 80 years old, even in Africa. That's what globalization has brought for the world, and that is now subject to attacks by not only President Donald Trump, but also political parties in Europe, in the individual countries. So I think the most important part at the macro and the global level is to defend that globalization process and let it continue.
Very quickly, Lord Manderson, despite the glow of the remarks by President Xi Jinping in last winter Davos of supporting globalization, given the dynamics of the Chinese domestic politics, a lot of the Europeans and Americans start to question whether China will go ahead anyway supporting globalization and free trade.
I think what Xi Jinping realizes, above all, is that you are not going to build socialism, even socialism with Chinese characteristics, in one country. You need the rest of the world to join with you, to trade with you, to invest with you, to engage in partnerships together, if you're going to sustain the levels of growth and rising living standards that he wants to see for the Chinese people. So it's not a question of if or whether or whatever. In my view, he knows fully well that the only real economic future for China, given the scale of his ambition that he wants to pull off for this country, is if you continue to join with the rest of the world. And that means globalization has to be sustained, but in my view, it needs to be a more fair and balanced and equitable globalization in respect of its impact and the sharing of its benefits and the fruits of globalization within countries. And I say that about my own country as much as I do anyone else's.
What you say actually suggests that we should level the playing field. But the Americans, particularly President Trump, will have a strong mixed feeling about this. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.